From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lines, I'm Joe Matthew.
President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy's meeting in the Oval Office devolves into a heated argument.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
Zelenskiy leaving the White House without signing a deal on natural resources as intended. We'll have more in Bloomberg's exclusive conversation with Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent later this hour.
We'll also have analysis from former Ambassador Kurt Volker, U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations during the first Trump administration, and Evelyn Farkas of the McCain Institute. Plus, we'll get reaction from Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York. Thanks for joining us on this Friday, a day when Zelenskiy and Trump were supposed to be signing a deal on Ukrainian natural resources and making progress toward ending the ongoing war with Russia, but instead found themselves in a heated exchange in the Oval Office.
I'm not aligned with Putin. I'm not aligned with anybody. I'm aligned with the United States of America. And for the good of the world, I'm aligned with the world. You want me to be tough? I could be tougher than any human being you've ever seen. I'd be so tough. But you're never going to get a deal that way.
You have nice ocean and don't feel now, but you will feel it in the future. God bless.
You don't know that.
God bless. God bless. You will not have a war.
Don't tell us what we're going to feel. We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that. Remember this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. Your country is in big trouble.
I know.
You're not winning. You're not winning this. You have a damn good chance of coming out okay because of us.
Mr. President.
After the meeting melted down, their joint news conference that had been planned for the East Room a bit later was canceled. Zelenskiy left the White House campus. And joining us now is Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, who's been tracking this story all day at the White House. Tyler?
Well, Joe, you might hear the engines of Marine One, which just touched down here on the White House on the South Lawn. We are expecting President Trump to depart shortly after that Oval Office meeting today, which really originally had the intent that both sides were going to sign that critical minerals deal later on in the day. It was something that President Trump had said was important in order to secure long-term U.S. support. But Zelenskiy said that he had wanted firmer security guarantees. He viewed this as a first step, but that the document itself was not enough. And Zelenskiy notably drew some comparisons, saying that he had gotten assurances from European allies, but not from the U.S. And really, Joe and Kaylee, the tension started to build from there. And they really started to flare, particularly when Vice President J.D. Vance weighed into the conversation, accusing Zelenskiy of being ungrateful. After that, the meeting was cut off. The press ushered out, as you mentioned, that press conference canceled. And Zelenskiy left the White House through those northwest gates right behind me. We did have the chance to hear from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham. He was here at the White House, considered to be a staunch supporter of Ukraine. He said he spoke with President Trump after the meeting, and he's not sure how a deal could be saved.
What I saw in the Oval Office was disrespectful, and I don't know if we can ever do business with Zelenskiy again. The way he handled the meeting, the way he confronted the president was just over the top. But can Zelenskiy do a deal with the United States? After what I saw, I don't know.
Both sides already weighing in a statement on X. Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York said the Oval Office meeting was a missed opportunity, going on to add, quote, the only winner of today was Vladimir Putin. Joe and Kaylee, after he left the White House, Zelenskiy himself took to X and he thanked President Trump, Congress, and the American people, going on to say that Ukraine is just looking for a just and lasting peace and that they are working towards exactly that.
All right, Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall, live from the White House. Thank you. And we should note Congressman Lawler, who Tyler just mentioned, will be joining us later this hour. But joining us first for more analysis and his thoughts is Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO and former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. Ambassador, thank you for being with us on Balance of Power. Every time we see the clip, I find myself just as stunned by what went down in the Oval Office today. What was going through your mind as you watched this unfold?
Oh, it's just terrible. Here, this was teed up to be a success for both countries today. We were going to have a mineral deal. We were going to have the U.S. invested in Ukraine's future. That meant implicit security commitments, even if they weren't explicit. President Trump had already met with Macron and Starmer this week about setting up European security forces to help protect Ukraine. And this was on a track that was going to be moving it forward to Ukraine's benefit and America's benefit. And to watch that conversation just devolve into shouting and pushing back, I really have to say, I think that President Zelensky completely mishandled it. We know what President Trump's views are. We know how he expresses them. No reason to engage in any of that in front of the cameras. Focus on the goal and what we're trying to do here. Real missed opportunity, as the congressman said.
So Tyler, Kendall's point, it was when Vice President J.D. Vance began to challenge President Zelensky that things started to go off the rails. Ambassador, if you could put your diplomat hat on here, what could have been done to save this conversation? There were a lot of people in the room besides the three who we saw on camera at that moment. How did this get so out of control?
Well, first off, I think it got out of control before that. I think that President Zelensky was reacting to President Trump, correcting President Trump, speaking over President Trump. And those are not the right things to do. And in addition to that, I think that President Zelensky doesn't need to react. J.D. Vance is there. He can say what he wants to say. Zelensky's counterpart is President Trump. The goal should have been to cut this off as quickly as possible and get to the actual business of what we're doing. And, you know, you're interviewing politicians all the time. You know that they don't always answer the question you ask. They pivot it to what they want to say. And that's exactly what President Zelensky should have done.
Well, and what we were hearing from Zelensky in the Oval prior to when this particularly heated moment happened, Ambassador, was a suggestion that while he was willing to sign this deal today, he did not view the document itself as enough. He wanted other security guarantees. Had this gone the way it was planned to today and this minerals deal be signed, was that, in your view, actually going to be enough to guarantee deterrence of Vladimir Putin in the future?
Nothing is ever over. You have this deal, and that doesn't mean you don't have any other deals or any other conversations in the future. You get this done, it puts us on a track, it creates some shared interest, and you keep working. And you keep looking for, okay, now how do we make sure we have continued access to U.S. weapons and ammunition? How do we work with the Europeans on their presence, and what's the U.S. backup for that? Just because it's not in this particular document doesn't mean it is something you could never do. And I think trying to insist on that now, especially in public, in the Oval Office, when this was meant to be a good day, I think it was a big mistake.
We spoke earlier today on the early edition of Balance of Power, Ambassador, with Daniel Fried, the former Assistant Secretary of State for Europe, former ambassador to Poland, who was just as blown away as everyone watching this unfold. Here's how he believes the administration should handle next steps with Ukraine.
If I were advising President Trump, I would say, look, you made your point. Now tell Zelensky, make light of it. Tell Zelensky we need a deal. Let's show people after we've pushed back that we can do this.
But you get the boss alone in a room right now. Everyone goes cool off for a minute. I need to talk to you alone.
The national security, this is the job for the national security advisor.
Yep.
And I think Mike Waltz is a serious person.
And he was right in there.
That's right.
But that didn't happen, Ambassador. And of course, President Zelensky and the Ukrainian delegation were asked to leave the campus. We just heard from Senator Lindsey Graham, as you might have noted at the top of the program. I don't know if we can ever do business again, is what this once at least Ukraine hawk said. Is he right?
You know, I don't agree with that. I understand where Lindsey's coming from, and he had just spoken with the president, so I know there's a lot of emotion around that right now. But I think what Dan Fried said is right. That would be the right advice to the president. Say, look, this deal is actually in America's interest. So let's focus on America's interest here and let's get this. But I would be giving the same advice to President Zelensky. This deal is in Ukraine's interest. It is vital. Without this, the country is at risk. You need to apologize to the American people for disrespecting the office of the Oval Office of the United States. And you need to ask for another meeting and sign that deal and get things back on track. I think the ball is really in Zelensky's court at this point.
Well, what are the role of other individuals that you have mentioned in this conversation, Ambassador, who were the first to visit the White House this week? The President of France, Emmanuel Macron, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who just in his own statement says he's spoken with both President Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky and that he retains his what he describes as unwavering support for Ukraine. What do European allies, many of them convening in the UK on Sunday, do next?
Yeah, this is a problem because what we are seeing here is divisions growing between Europeans and Americans and Ukraine. And this is not in Ukraine's interest. It's not in Europe's or America's interest. The only person who benefits from this is Vladimir Putin. And it is something that I would hope Zelensky would want to put a stop to get the U.S. and Europe and Ukraine all on the same page. And that President Trump should want to. But after today, I think the ball, again, is in Zelensky's court.
Real pleasure to have you with us today, Ambassador. Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. We thank you, as always. Coming up, Bloomberg's David Westin, bringing us maybe the most important interview of the day. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent on the minerals deal that was left unsigned after that heated White House exchange. You will only see it and hear it on Bloomberg, and we'll have part of that conversation next here on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. Thanks for being with us on the Friday edition. Earlier today, Bloomberg's David Westin brought us the most important interview you will hear today with U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and it happened right after today's heated Oval Office exchange between Presidents Trump and Zelensky. Here's a piece of that conversation.
Clearly, it's very difficult to do an economic deal with a leader who doesn't want to do a peace deal. And I will tell you, I was sitting 3 away from President Trump or President Zelensky, and this has to be one of the great diplomatic own goals in history.
If Mr. Zelensky called back right now and said, I'm sorry, I want to put it back together, what would he have to do?
I don't know. Mr. Zelensky and his team were taken out of the Oval, and they kept coming back with that message, and then they left the White House, and it's going to take a lot of repair. And, you know, David, the real tragedy here, maybe things can be repaired with the administration, but I don't know how the American people are going to feel. And more importantly, the economic deal, the meeting today, the real purpose was to show that there was no daylight between the Americans and the Ukrainians. So President Trump's idea was to show that with the economic deals, to show that we're more intertwined, and that would be a symbol to the Ukrainian people, to Russian leadership, and to the American people. And President Zelensky blew that up today. I'm not sure what he was thinking.
As I say, you were the point person, really, for the administration on the economic deal. We all thought on the outside we were very close. In fact, I think many of us thought there'd be a signing today, that we'd have some form of economic deal today. Were we as close as those of us on the outside thought? Were you surprised?
Again, I was shocked that President Zelensky would come into the Oval Office, behave like this, speak to the president, speak to the vice president, but more importantly, disrespect the American people like this. I know he's under a great deal of stress. He and I had a very heated exchange in Kyiv. I think the same thing may have happened between him and Vice President Vance and Secretary Rubio in Munich. And, you know, to come in and behave like this was unacceptable. And look, I mean, what better runway, what what better runway did he have? That President of France, Emmanuel Macron, in the Oval on Monday. Yesterday, we had a fantastic meeting with Prime Minister Keir Starmer from the UK, and then President Zelensky today. I mean, you could not have asked for a better arc. And he walked in, and I'm not sure what he was thinking.
Many of us have been in heated negotiations, not at this level, but still heated negotiations where people pound the table, they may walk out the door and things like that, and it's actually part of the negotiation. Is that what we saw today, or was this a more fundamental rupture?
David, you don't do a negotiation with the President of the United States in public like this. That we were scheduled to have lunch afterwards, and that perhaps he could have brought up some of the points. Instead, he chose to let things go into a downward spiral on worldwide television. And, again, I keep coming back to the disrespect of the American people. It was one thing for President Zelensky and I had an extended, heated negotiation in Kyiv, but we were going to get this economic agreement done. But when you bring it out to the public like this, we'll see if there's any coming back.
Joining us now to discuss their conversation a bit more, Bloomberg's David Westin, the host of Wall Street Week. David, it's great to have you with us from World Headquarters in New York. The timing of this conversation couldn't have been more important today. And we have to remind our viewers and listeners that Scott Bessent, I don't believe he got to it in that portion of your conversation, was in Kyiv just a couple of weeks ago with that very same minerals deal. And he told you that he was not treated well by President Zelensky.
Yeah, it's fascinating because you don't see things go this badly off the rails in public with heads of state. And you'll recall when he did go to Kyiv, he presented an agreement and by reports said, I'd like you to sign it now. And President Zelensky said, no, I can't sign it now. I've got to take a look at it and think about it and come back. But then the reporting that I saw, at least largely, was they'd sort of worked out things and President Zelensky had moved toward the United States. And as I say, I thought that maybe they'd actually conclude the deal today. So I can't imagine exactly what went wrong. I would hope it wasn't just the personal dynamics in that room, because you had three men who are very strong-willed, powerful men who looked like they sort of got their backs up. But I hope it was about something more fundamental than that. But the most important thing, I think, is can it be put back together? Because if it can't, that can be really bad news, certainly for Ukraine, and I think potentially for the United States.
Well, David, President Trump was just speaking to reporters as he was getting ready to board Marine One at the White House and suggested maybe what it will take. He says Zelensky has to come and say he wants to make peace. He suggested that President Zelensky wants to come back right now, but Trump says he can't let that happen. He said Zelensky is looking for a fight while he's looking for peace. We'll play back that tape when we get it. But, David, when it comes to this minerals deal specifically and this notion, and we heard the Treasury Secretary talking about it, that this is something that was supposed to economically benefit not just Ukraine, but the United States as well. Do you see with this administration, with Secretary Bessent, with the mind of Donald Trump, who does like to make deal, that they're still going to want those economic advantages, even if they don't necessarily want to be dealing with Zelensky, the individual?
Well, you heard the Secretary of the Treasury there say, boy, I'm not sure what it's going to take. It's going to be real hard. He didn't close the door. He didn't say it can't be done. And he said, actually, in the interview, he's still the point person for maybe putting something back together again. But I would add one other thing, Kayleigh. As you said, it is supposedly economically beneficial to Ukraine, economically beneficial to the United States. But also, part of what Secretary Bessent said was this is an idea of intertwining the two countries, the United States and Ukraine, which actually would enhance the security of Ukraine, because if we had investments there, if we had people on the ground doing some of the development of the raw minerals, that in fact that would be a real tripwire for Russia. That would be a signal to Russia. And so he sees it, Scott Bessent at least sees it in part as a security issue as well as an economic issue.
All right. Bloomberg's David Westin, thank you so much. And you can find David's full conversation with Treasury Secretary Bessent online or at the terminal. And, of course, make sure to tune in to Wall Street Week with David tonight and every Friday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. And coming up, we'll get reaction to today's events from our signature political panel, Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano. Join us next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio.
Mr. President, with respect, I think it's disrespectful for you to come into the Oval Office and try to litigate this in front of the American media. Right now, you guys are going around and forcing conscripts to the front lines because you have manpower problems. You should be thanking the president for trying to bring it into this conflict.
Have you ever been to Ukraine? That you say what problems we have?
I have been to...
Come once.
President Trump, Vice President Vance chastising the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskiy during the meeting we've been discussing today in the Oval Office. J.D. Vance was vocal in saying Zelenskiy had not been thankful enough for the support that the U.S. has supplied Ukraine over the past 3 years. Joining us now, our signature political panel, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis, Stone Court Capital partner and Republican strategist, and Jeannie Sheehan Zaino, Democratic analyst and political science professor at Iona University. So let's get into this. You were actually with us on the early edition of Balance of Power when this actually transpired. You called it a failure of diplomacy. Rick, how do they get out of this?
Yeah, look, I think, putting Humpty Dumpty back together again is not going to be easy for either individual. Trump, would probably expect Zelensky to apologize. Zelensky has to apologize. I don't see there's an entry point to the Oval Office again unless that's done, and sooner than later and in a public fashion, because all this transpired in front of the press corps of the United States. I mean, it's going to be difficult to get this back on track, but you think about it. I mean, we did have a great runway coming into Friday, with the arrival on Tuesday of the President of France and then Thursday with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, everybody pulling in the same direction. All we had to do was sign this document, and we're into a peace talk. And nothing should have gotten in the way of that. No conversation, no insult, no taking the bait. Everyone should have just sat there, and if Zelensky got attacked by the vice president, he should have said, "Thank you very much. I appreciate the American people's willingness to support us, and I'm here to sign a deal with the president."
Well, so when we consider what the original aim was here, Jeannie, I do wonder if there may have been some mismatching of expectations, because Vladimir Zelensky was posting on X ahead of this visit to the U.S. that he was coming here today for negotiations. That was actually a word that he used. And so I do wonder if it may have been a surprise to Trump administration officials that there was more he wanted to talk about, but that was always what he intended to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a good point, because he was saying that, and the Trump administration was saying, we're going to sign this deal. And of course, for Zelensky, the deal had enormous gaps. The big one was being security. And that's what this whole dust up was about, because Zelensky was trying to say, you can't trust Vladimir Putin. We've been there. Minsk 1, Minsk 2. He reneged on both of those. And that's when J.D. Vance chimed in and shot back. And, I think Rick is right. I keep going back to Queen Victoria. Close your eyes and think of England. That's what Zelensky's task was. Close your eyes and think of Ukraine. No matter what they say, close your eyes and just keep moving forward. But let's be honest. Who could do that after losing as many hundreds of thousands of people as he has, his country taken over, invaded? He just lost his cool in that moment and tried to school the president and the vice president on the history of Vladimir Putin, and they were having none of it.
Well, it's interesting. Lindsey Graham came out in the driveway of the White House after and said, "I told him not to take the bait." Rick, does that mean this was some sort of ambush?
No, it's not an ambush. I mean, anybody who's used to dealing with Donald Trump, especially in a condition like this, is used to getting pushed, right? And J.D. Vance, he's a little bit more of a wild card, but he's not a person who's going to withhold his views. And the two of them were in total opposite camps when they were in Munich just recently, right at the security conference. And so if you're watching that, you have to know that you stand the chance of getting into it with two different visions of what needs to happen in the future of Ukraine. And again, he should have been prepared for that. And the idea is it's not mutually exclusive to say there's a negotiation and a signing. The negotiation is over a peace treaty. The signing was a financial deal that helped align the interests of U.S. and Ukraine. That would have been a very good step toward getting a peace deal that Ukraine could live with. And I just think that maybe Zelensky tried to do too much at one time, but as Jeannie said, rehashing the history of the war with Russia was exactly the opposite of what he came here to do.
Well, I do wonder, though, as Joe raises Lindsey Graham, if you're surprised by what we heard from the senator, who has been one of the staunchest advocates for Ukraine in the United States Senate. At one point was threatening to potentially shut down the government if Ukraine appropriations weren't put on the floor. He felt very strongly about this and is now suggesting Zelensky might even need to resign? Is he just acknowledging a political reality with a new president in the White House, or has he actually changed his mind about something?
Well, look, I mean, I think it's fair to say that for the last few years, Lindsey's been a very good telegrapher of Donald Trump's views on Ukraine. And even though he is one of the staunchest hawks on Ukraine, he is not without his, relationship with Donald Trump and the understanding that he doesn't have the same view that Lindsey shares. And so when you hear Lindsey say this, it's probably coming from a recent moments earlier conversation with the president in the Oval Office about, like, what'll it take to get this back on track? Because Lindsey's view will be, how do we get this back? And the fact that he thinks that Zelensky may not be the right person to do it shouldn't surprise anybody. But you know what? You can have your cake and eat it, too. Zelensky's already said when he was in Munich that he wasn't going to, if he wanted to have him step down, he'd step down in order to get a peace deal. What's the difference?
Headline on the terminal, Jeannie, Russia delights in the dressing down of Zelensky in Oval Office. We've heard this repeatedly today. I think Rick said earlier they're high-fiving in Moscow. Is Russia the winner here?
Absolutely. And one of the statements I couldn't even read or repeat on Bloomberg, calling Zelensky a pig, that he was slapped down, and other really, really strong language coming out of Moscow. Since I'm here with Rick in person, can I disagree with him for a minute? Because I don't often get that chance. I do think there are questions about whether this was an ambush. And let's look at one thing. It seems like a small thing, but the critique of Zelensky's dress right when he got there. Nobody says a word when Elon Musk comes into the Oval Office, baseball hat and T-shirt, but Zelensky got chastised for what he was wearing, a president at war. And then, of course, you have the reality that Donald Trump has never liked Zelensky. And there are people now talking about what Lindsey Graham said publicly. This was all about regime change. Putin and Trump want Zelensky out. And yeah, he did agree to get out, but that was in exchange for entry to NATO, which is not going to happen. We all know that. But there is a question as to whether this was a setup and an ambush. And there's no question Zelensky walked right into the chainsaw that was waiting for him. So I think both things can be true.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, will be with us a bit later on this hour. And I would note for our audience on Bloomberg Television and on YouTube, we're looking at a live shot of Joint Base Andrews, where Marine One has just landed. The president will soon be getting on board Air Force One to head down to Palm Beach, Florida, for an event this evening. Of course, before he boarded the helicopter itself, he did speak to press and again said Zelensky needs to come back to him and say that he's ready for peace. We want to add another voice to this conversation now and turn to Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York, who is here with us on both Bloomberg TV and radio. Congressman, thank you for your time. You, of course, posted a rather lengthy statement on X today in which you said it was extremely short-sighted to engage in that type of exchange in front of U.S. and international press as you work towards an agreement. Who ultimately shoulders the blame for what went down today in your mind?
Well, ultimately, there was a 40-minute conversation before it devolved, and it was actually mostly productive. And then it obviously disintegrated right in front of us. And so, when you are the president of Ukraine and you're seeking the support and the assistance of the United States, obviously coming into the Oval Office and having that back and forth in public was not constructive for Volodymyr Zelensky's purposes. I think in this situation, the only winner was Vladimir Putin. And so from my vantage point, it is critically important that President Zelensky get back in touch with President Trump as quickly as possible and, get this deal completed. I've been very clear in my support for Ukraine. The consequences of failure here would be catastrophic for Eastern Europe. President Trump understands that, which is part of the reason why President Trump is pushing to get a ceasefire and get an economic deal between Ukraine and the United States. The fact is that greater economic cooperation with the U.S., will lead to greater security cooperation and make it very difficult, once there is a ceasefire, for Russia to violate the terms of such ceasefire. So I think folks need to recognize what is attempted to be done here is to bring this conflict to an end, which This conflict has resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent Ukrainians. And we want this conflict to come to an end. We want Ukraine's sovereignty to be protected. But there has to be
Congressman, I'm sorry to interrupt, Congressman. If you could stand by for just a moment. President Trump speaking to reporters in the driveway as he heads for Marine One. Let's just put a quick ear on what he's saying as he exits the White House.
Investment anybody's ever made in the country at one time, but they're going to be investing a lot of money, $500 billion. We have many other companies have just announced they're coming in. A lot of it's because of how we're doing. We've done a great turnaround in a little more than 30 days, but the country's really doing well, really doing well. We're respected again all over the world. If you look, we had the Japanese Prime Minister. We had the Prime Minister yesterday of UK, as you know. We had the Prime Minister of India. We have another 20 Prime Ministers and Presidents wanting to come. And it's very good feeling. I think our country has really turned around. We had a meeting today, as you know, with President Zelenskiy, and I would say it didn't work out exactly great from his standpoint. I think he very much overplayed his hand. We're looking for peace. We're not looking for somebody that's going to sign up a strong power and then not make peace because they feel emboldened, and that's what I saw happening. I'm looking for peace. We're not looking to go into a 10-year war and play games. We want peace. And it was just my impression that if we do that, if we sign up, he's looking for something that I'm not looking for. He's looking to go on and fight. We're looking to end the death. 2,000 people died this week. Soldiers, more than that, but 2,000 approximately people died this week. Young Ukrainians and Russians. And somebody would say, why do you care about Ukraine and Russian soldiers? I care about them. I care about everybody. And we're not doing that. Now, if we don't do anything, he's going to have to make peace, but he's dealing with a very weak set of cards. If we sign, he's dealing with a very strong set of cards, and then he doesn't want to make peace. So that's where we are. It's very simple. I'm not looking to get into anything protracted. I want immediate peace. President Putin is going to want to make, and he wants to end it. And you saw what I saw today. This is a man that wants to get us signed up and keep fighting, and we're not doing that, not for this country. So we're setting a lot of records. Economically, we're setting records, and I think every way we're setting records. One of the best is the right track, wrong track. You saw that. We're on the right track for the first time in over 27 years. People are impressed with that. The other thing is the feeling about our country. The feeling is great. It's up 48% on feeling on business. And that's the record we've never had. There's never been a record where we've ever gone up that much in such a short period of time. So we're doing really well. And I guess some of you are coming with us. And if you are, I hope you're going to have a good flight. What? What does Zelensky need to start talking? He's got to say, I want to make peace. He doesn't have to stand there and say about Putin this, Putin that, and all negative things. He's got to say, I want to make peace. I don't want to fight a war any longer. His people are dying. He doesn't have the cards, just so you understand it, okay? I can tell you. Did you tell Zelensky to leave the White House? I don't have to tell you that. Go ahead. I think you know the answer to that. What? Wait. Look, I don't trust or distrust anybody. I just want to get a deal done. And if the deal happens, good. But you can't embolden somebody that does not have the cards, and all of a sudden that person says, oh, well, now I can keep fighting. We're not going to keep fighting. You're going to get the war done or let them go and see what happens. Let them fight it out. I want anybody that's going to make peace. If he's capable of making peace, which he may or may not be, but I want somebody that's going to make peace. Again, he doesn't have the cards. When we sign up, he's got all of the cards. That doesn't mean he can fight. He's got to stop the fighting, stop the death. He's losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers. It's time to stop the death. Say it. Well, he says he wants it now. He wants to come back right now, but I can't do that. I can't. They should have an immediate ceasefire. That was the other thing. He didn't want to do about ceasefire. A ceasefire could take place immediately. A contract, if you want to end the war, you sign up an agreement. That's going to take a period of time. It takes time. I want it to end immediately. And I think if you had a ceasefire, it would be a ceasefire, a real one, that would end it. But he doesn't want to do that. That's fine. Do a better deal. I want it to end immediately. I want a ceasefire now. He says, oh, I don't want a ceasefire. Well, all of a sudden, he's a big shot because he has the U.S. on his side. Either we're going to end it or let him fight it out. And if he fights it out, it's not going to be pretty. Because without us, he doesn't win, let me tell you. It doesn't matter what I'm considering. I'm just telling you. You saw what I saw today. That was not a man that wanted to make peace. And I'm only interested if he wants to end the bloodshed. Thank you very much, everybody.
President Trump on the South Lawn of the White House making his way to Marine One, and he's on his way now to Florida. That took place just a few moments ago. The latest comment that we've heard from the President of the United States following the meltdown meeting that we've been talking about earlier today in the Oval Office. Republican Congressman Mike Lawler of New York has been kind to stand by. He was listening and watching along with us. Congressman, thank you for your patience. Interesting toward the end there, Donald Trump says, Zelensky wants to come back right now, but I can't let him come back right now. Are we going to enter some sort of a cooling off period? How do we get this back on the tracks?
My hope is that certainly they reconnect, before President Zelensky leaves the U.S. I think it's important to get back to the table and get an agreement done. Look, President Trump's been very clear on his position throughout the campaign and since taking office that he wants this conflict to come to an end. I think, broadly speaking, everybody agrees with that. Obviously, I want to make sure that Ukraine's structural sovereignty is secure. And I think President Trump's point is that by having greater economic cooperation with the United States, will all but guarantee that. And make sure that there is stronger security cooperation. But the objective has to be to bring this conflict to a close. And ultimately, I think the president's point is Ukraine is in a weakened state, obviously with the significant loss of life over the last 3 years, and that the longer this conflict rages on, the more precarious a position they're going to be in. We want this conflict to end with Russia out, with Ukraine a sovereign nation. And obviously, as they work to rebuild, they're going to need significant investment by the United States and Europe and others to help rebuild their country. And that's part of what this economic agreement is about. So, look, I think, again, this was an extremely unfortunate event today. I think there was great potential heading into it, and obviously during the course of the conversation it devolved. But ultimately, we need to get cooler heads to prevail and get back to the table.
Congressman, at the very end of his conversation with the press, he was asked a question which he didn't answer directly as to whether or not he is now considering cutting off the remaining U.S. aid to Ukraine. You, of course, in the House played a role in making sure that that aid was appropriated. Would you discourage him from doing so in the hopes that everyone can get back to the table eventually?
Yes, I am opposed to cutting off the aid to Ukraine. But all the more reason why it is imperative President Zelensky get back to see President Trump as quickly as possible and get this back on track. This is not in anyone's interest to have this devolve or to see Ukraine collapse. It would be catastrophic for Eastern Europe and other former Soviet satellite states. Vladimir Putin is very clear about his objective. And we should be clear-eyed about one simple truth. Vladimir Putin is a vile dictator and thug who is not our ally or friend.
Congressman, if I could just steal one more moment with you here, I'd love to ask you about the budget process that's underway and more specifically funding the government as we head for a funding deadline in the middle of March. Do you agree with President Trump? Do you support his idea of a long-term continuing resolution going through the rest of the fiscal year, the end of September? Is that something you would support?
I have always been clear about one thing. A government shutdown is not in the cards. I am fully against any shutdown. It does not serve any purpose and will not save us any money in the long run. So if a long-term CR, year-long CR, is what gets this across the finish line and keeps the government funded, I, of course, would support that. I know our chairman of the Appropriations Committee, Tom Cole, has been negotiating with the Democrats and Rosa DeLauro, the ranking member, on a top-line number to try and finalize appropriations. And hopefully we can reach an agreement before the deadline. But one thing should be clear to everyone. If the government shuts down, it will be because Senate Democrats refused to pass a CR. There is no reason for a government shutdown. We should continue to do the work of the American people and ultimately make sure that the government is funded.
Congressman, it's good to have you back. Mike Lawler, Republican from New York, with us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. Have a great weekend. As we turn back to the heated exchange we've been discussing, as the world watched in the Oval Office earlier today, Donald Trump, Volodymyr Zelenskiy, J.D. Vance, and now we add the voice of Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director at Arizona State University's McCain Institute, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Russia and Ukraine. Evelyn, great to see you. Thanks for joining. We just heard from President Trump before he got on the chopper to get out of town here. He's on his way to Florida, having said that Volodymyr Zelensky wanted to come back, but it's not time for that yet. How do you see this process getting back on track? Or was this actually a bigger event that we need to talk about?
Well, Joe, I think that I agree with a lot of the points the congressman made, because it's in our national interest for the president of the United States and the president of Ukraine to be on the same page. It is imperative that Volodymyr Zelensky and President Trump meet again as soon as possible to kind of put everything back on track. There is a possibility that they could sign this agreement on the minerals, and that, I think, would provide a face-saving way for them to kind of put that horrible scene in the Oval Office behind all of us.
Well, if we get down to the very basic thing that they were attempting to achieve today, Evelyn, which was this minerals deal, President Trump argues that that is enough of a security guarantee, that a closer economic relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine would be adequate deterrent against any future invasion President Putin may desire to pursue. Zelensky says, no, I need greater security guarantee than that. Which one of them do you tend to agree with?
Well, I completely agree with President Zelensky, because it's not sufficient to say the United States has a stake, so Russia should not invade. Russia doesn't care. Russia will invade if Russia thinks that U.S. troops are not going to protect those minerals. So there is an open question there that, frankly, I would argue should be explored further. Probably President Zelensky wanted to explore that open question and get the answer ASAP. He pushed in that meeting to try to nudge the president or move the president to the answer, and didn't get it. And, perhaps that was a tactical, misstep, that he might have been able to just sign the agreement and see what happens. But there is a real danger for him that he signs the agreement and President Trump goes back to the Russians, because our president's speaking with the Russians without Ukraine or the Europeans there. So there is a danger that our president could say, okay, I'm going to agree to X, Y, and Z on behalf of Ukraine and just don't invade because we have this agreement. So I think that there's a lack of trust, and that's the fundamental problem.
Well, Evelyn, I'm not sure what the next step is here for Volodymyr Zelensky. He's got plans, of course. Would it behoove him to just stay in the country
I think
until Donald Trump comes back to Washington?
I think he should try, Joe. I mean, my heart is breaking that he has to, do this because, frankly, we were hosting him. He was our guest, and he was horrendously mistreated, in public by the two most powerful men in the world. So, and meanwhile, Zelensky is a hero. His people are heroic. They're holding the line against Russia and China, Iran and North Korea, holding the line for our international order and for our European allies in the first instance.
Do you not think he crossed the line, Evelyn? We've been hearing from people since this took place, and we were live on the air when it happened, that he disrespected the president, disrespected the Oval Office. What do you think?
I don't think so, no. I mean, I think he was pushing back. Unfortunately, he probably pushed back with less charm than, the French and the British leaders did. But from what I saw, he was trying to hold his own and kind of make sure that the truth had an airing. He probably could have just sat back. I'm not sure whether that would have served him well. Remember, he's also a leader of a sovereign nation. So, but clearly something needed to happen to de-escalate the situation, and, took a very long time before the situation ran out of its own steam.
Well, as we consider things that are running out of steam, it was suggested, Evelyn, by the president today that without the U.S., Ukraine is not going to be able to keep going. But obviously, we have seen a laundry list of European leaders and other allies coming out and reiterating their support for Ukraine and how it will be ongoing in the aftermath of this today. If the U.S. were to decide there is no deal to be made, we are walking away, cutting off aid, what have you, is Europe going to be able to be enough of a backstop?
I mean, Kayleigh, I think that Europe can be, if Europe unfreezes the $300 billion that they can unfreeze for Ukraine, that Ukraine then can use to buy weaponry, including from U.S. companies. And, I would imagine that then they can hold the line. Don't forget, on the other side, the Russians are also hurting. They don't have enough ammunition, they don't have enough weaponry, and they don't have enough manpower without calling out a full mobilization, which President Putin doesn't want to do. This war is not popular in Russia.
All right, Evelyn Farkas, Executive Director of the McCain Institute and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Ukraine and Russia. Thank you so much for joining us on this Friday as we end a week in geopolitics that is far different than we began it. Remember, we kicked things off with a visit from French President Emmanuel Macron on Monday. Here's a reminder.
President Macron was a very special man in my book. We were together. We did it together. And I think a lot of progress has been made.
I want to thank Mr. President for his hospitality. We had a good discussion this morning for the G7 here.
The United Kingdom is a wonderful country that I know very well.
Our countries have been bound together for a very long time now.
I don't think you'd be a tough guy without the United States. And your people are very brave. But you're either going to make a deal or we're out. And if we're out, you'll fight it out. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel.
That was the week that was. 3 foreign leaders visiting the White House to discuss the future of the war in Ukraine, which after today is, of course, very much in question. And back with us now for reflection is our signature political panel and closers, Bloomberg Politics contributors Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzino. We should note as we end this week, next week is also going to be a big one for President Trump. He has a joint address to Congress, Jeannie, scheduled for Tuesday. What is he going to be saying about the way forward on this conflict in particular that he came into office saying he was going to end in a single day?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to hear more of what we heard, quite frankly, when he was leaving the White House today. I think he is going to say he is interested in peace, and Vladimir Zelensky came into the White House and disrespected him, and he's got to come back and demand peace. But, I think what we also have to remember, another thing happened this week, which is that the Trump administration, the United States, joined with China, North Korea and Russia and several other nations that some people describe as an axis of evil, including Iran, in not supporting a resolution on the 3rd anniversary of this war. Why? Because they refused to say that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. So that is what makes this, what happened today, not as surprising as it otherwise might be.
Well, I'm guessing President Zelenskyy will not be in the First Lady's box at the big speech on Tuesday night. We will all be here to witness this. You'll both be here to help analyze it. Do the events of today help to reshape that speech over the weekend?
You know, I'd say the one thing you got to remember is Donald Trump does not hold grudges in the way that a typical person does. Sitting next to him in the Oval Office was J.D. Vance, who called him Hitler at one point in time. So it gets worse than what happened today with Donald Trump, and they kiss and make up. Hopefully, by Tuesday, they've kissed and made up. Donald Trump can announce a finalized deal on the minerals and that they're moving toward a peace agreement.
So you try to seize on that event to make an announcement.
Absolutely. And look, Donald Trump would much rather look like he got a deal done than to complain about somebody who, you know, is not important to him in his exercise of the presidency. And so I just think that, you know, you got to give him a win when you can. And frankly, the alignment of our economic interests with Ukraine is essential in the future prosperity of Ukraine. And so I think we just got to act in our own national interest, get a deal done, and move it to a point where you can do what Donald Trump said, which is stop the killing, because that's in everybody's interest.
Obviously, Ukraine took over our focus today, but we should also point out something else that's slated to happen on Tuesday, which is tariffs on Canada and Mexico of 25% and an additional 10% on Chinese goods. Jeannie, if you had to call it right now, does that actually happen?
It's looking like it will. I mean, I don't see, based on what he said at that cabinet meeting, that they could assure him that they have addressed the issues of fentanyl and others that he wants to. So, you know, it's in keeping in a way with what happened today, because these two, at least when you look at Canada and Mexico, formerly very close allies, but this is where he seems to place things, is allies be gone, be damned. He will still go ahead with this.
If Justin Trudeau says, go ahead, build the Keystone XL pipeline, are the tariffs stay away?
If that happened, yeah.
Maybe not.
Yeah, I think that might be one thing, but I can't imagine it happening.
We have 30 seconds, Rick. Is Tuesday going to be tariff day?
Tuesday, yeah, he's going to declare victory on tariffs. He's going to declare victory on you. I mean, like, look, this is what he wants to do, and he'll do it.
All right, we'll leave it on that note. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano both with us in Washington as we round out an incredibly busy week. Yeah. Of course, you can always get coverage of that in the Washington Edition newsletter, on the terminal, and online.
Thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. Have a great weekend. We'll see you back here Monday on Bloomberg TV and radio.